adjust my values on the fly right away in a projection, right away in an auction, and say add 5. Now, I don't want to buy a pitcher for 5, but if a pitcher goes only $2 over my value, that is to me a bargain because the market's paying 4 above my values. I want a $2 player above my value. So I am a strict drafter in terms of the rules, but I'm not hard on the first dollar numbers that come out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I think you outlined the process similar to what I suspected. I think you have very well rationed reasoning for making the adjustments you're making, and I think you're probably making them more precisely than I am. But we're trying to make the same adjustments based on basically the exact same factors.
Right. Ruvain, anything to add on strictness of following values and all that?
Yes, it helps a lot to have a second person on the team like myself because you always want to pay the extra dollar more, and I'm always holding you back because if you pay the extra dollar more on a whole bunch of different players, you're not going to end up with the total amount of value that you're going to want. You have to listen during a draft. Things happen, and prices sometimes are getting bidding wars, and it gets very, very heated out there. You can't get caught up in that. You have to still stick to the numbers, and sometimes if you're doing it solo, you know what? You get caught up in it, then all of a sudden you end up with a player you're overpaying by $5, $6, $7 when you wanted to overpay maybe $2 or $3, and it screws you the rest of the draft. So having a teammate, having someone there also, keeping track of this stuff, keeping track of your budget, keeping track of the rest of the market, keeping track of what other teams need, that helps immensely.
Oh, totally. Now, here's a question that I often get very, very, very much is in an auction, what do you set as the hitter versus pitcher split? You know, a lot of used to be 70-30. Some people say go 2/3, 1/3. If you look at the NFBC, it's a lot closer to 62-38, something like that. Do you have an answer as to what you do and what you set up, Derek?
Yeah, I think I have probably been as aggressive, I'll say, as 60-40. I think 62-38 or 63-37 is probably where I usually end up now. That probably is the result of looking at a lot of NFBC results, playing with more NFBC-minded people, thinking about how people as a group are just chasing pitching differently, right? I mean, I think all those factors probably explain that shift. I definitely started with 70-30 a few years ago, and it was almost just what the more experienced players were doing, so I just followed suit. Oh, okay. Jeff is doing this. Liz is doing this. This is what these guys are doing. I'm going to follow them because they've helped teach me how to play, right? And I think as I've gone through this process more and more on my own and had to adapt to different rooms, I've realized, the split matters, but it's one of those things that I wouldn't want to be too strict about it. I think the type of room you're in is going to significantly alter what that split looks like. I think it's significant anyway. I think the difference between 60-40 and 70-30 is actually a pretty big one. But I think it really depends on what does the pool look like in a particular year and how is the room of people you're playing against, how are they valuing that group of players?
Yeah, so my answer to that, it's 100% you should be putting values, if you can, almost exactly to what the market's going to do. It's what the room is going to do. If you're playing in an NFBC draft and NFBC is going 62-38, your pre-draft values, the ones that you set up before anything, should be that. The idea is that you want to have the propensity to buy a hitter just as great as the propensity to buy a pitcher. You want to look at bargains on your side and have an equal amount of bargains on both the pitching and hitter side. Just to give you the exaggerated case, let's say for some reason the other 14 guys in your draft all get together and they're like, we're going to pound hitting. We're just going to go 80-20. And they come up with a split and they spend almost nothing on pitching and it's 80-20. If you decided before, I think it's 50-50. That's the right answer. Or it's 62, whatever. What's going to happen is that all the hitters are going to look really expensive to you because everyone's putting in so much more money, and all the pitching is going to look really cheap to you. So you're going to end up with a fantastic pitching team, but because it's Roto, your hitting team is going to stink. Remember, values, again, are all relative. And when I just talked about the concept of a market premium, is in that scenario, you can start with a 50-50, but then your market premium for hitting is going to be enormous. It's going to be $6 a player. Why do that? Set values so that your initial conception is 0. that there shouldn't be any market premium. The only market premium should be either a top pitcher versus a middle pitcher versus within each position, or you might find a market inefficiency. Maybe people are overpaying for second baseman, they're underpaying for third baseman. That's where you gain some value by finding the inefficiencies there. But between hitters and pitchers, you still got to draft 14 hitters, you still got to draft 9 pitchers. You should make the numbers on your sheet look exactly the same. One caveat to that: if you are far better in hitting and pitching, tilt your numbers just a little bit more on pitching, because you'll still be able to come up with bargains and you'll find some great ones on the hitting if you're better than it. If you're not as good as pitching, just give yourself a little bit more of a propensity to go the extra dollar and add a percent or two. So if you think the room is going to be 62 towards hitting and you're better at pitching, just tilt it 2% more in the direction that you're worse at, just to give you the incentive. Ruvain, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to add one thing to that. You have to be prepared and have a plan just in case what you prepared is not what the room is doing. So let's say you prepared 60-40, and all of a sudden it's starting to tilt more 80, like you said, 80-20. I'd love that, because that way all teams are, they're only going after one pitch, either pitching or hitting. That's great for me, hypothetically. But you have to be ready for an escape plan in case these changes, because you have to have a plan A, and plan A is what you want to do. Plan B is if this happens. Plan C is if this happens. And if you go into that like that, you're not going to get as flustered during the actual auction, and you actually be able to get the players that you want.
Yeah, you have to be adaptive, no doubt. And like I said before, you got to be able to adjust to what the market premium is right on the fly. We have leagues, and by the way, we have home leagues, Ruben and I, that the pitching goes enormous. So we bake a little bit more. I tilt all the percentages to higher to pitching. We also have a league where pitching hardly goes any. Even the NFBC, it's going high, but in our home league it doesn't. We tilt the percentages down. But of course, if things change, you got to adjust for that right on the fly. So bake in the market premium. Anything else to add, Derek, on that?
No, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And tilting slightly based on your strengths as a player is a nice adjustment to make, too. I think that was a good idea to bring that up.
Yeah. Here's another big question that I get all over the place is, you have your own auction values. And to me, the two most important pieces of information in an auction, if you could only get a piece of paper with 2 numbers on the page, it's 1, your auction value, and 2, the market value, what we think the market is going to pay. So the question is, hey, Ariel, how do you come up with that? Where do you get for an auction market value? Well, what do you do for that, Derek?
So I often look back at the draft or the auction from the year before. I look at those results and price the top players based on that. So if we're playing in an AL-only auction, what did Mike Trout go for last year, right? I want to know that and kind of work on everything based on that framework, at least as a starting point. And I look at those numbers compared to my projections for the current year. And obviously you're going to have to make some adjustments for the different players in the pool, but just conceptually, what was that room like? What was top dollar for the best player, for the best hitter, the best pitcher, the first closer? All of those different types of things we would run through. What were prospects going for in the end game, right? How good was the best prospect? Was he a $5 guy, a $7 guy? I try to look at that versus my projected values for the current season, and if my Trout value from the previous year, then that auction, if it was a $45 player and my numbers only have him at 38 and he's my best player again this year, I would say, all right, let's bump up the projected value a little bit just to get closer to where he should be. Because I think if you fail to do that, if you fail to adjust for the situation that you're in, you're going to run into a scenario that you described earlier where you're not going to get any of the elite hitters because you didn't account for the differences of that room. I think market values are tricky for auctions, because I think the unique dynamics of each auction doesn't necessarily give you this sort of common value the way we have in drafts with ADPs.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you're right that it's very hard to come up with this because every auction is different. It's a little bit more similar when you have the same players and the same kind of dynamic in the room. But if you're in a new auction, it's really hard to gauge. But again, that's where the market premium comes in, right away. So when we were in Florida last year and we observed your labor auction, Reuven and I came with our own projected values and market values. We made a guess as to where things are going to go. And what we did is we just sat and, okay, corner infielders, the first one, let's say we thought the first one was going to go for $40. It went for 40 exactly. We write 0. The next corner infielder comes 40, we write 0. So right away with 2 players, we gauged from your draft that we think that the experts are going to be pretty much on target from our guess, right? We're checking our guesses as to what's going to be. Pitchers, we saw a $2 market premium compared to not our values, but our guesses as to the market. So what we were able to do is, we were the third draft of that weekend. On Sunday, we bumped up all of the starting pitchers $2 up top. Just in case that, experts for some reason have the same kind of thinking. Very hard to do, but it's about the making guesses. But I'll give you 3 different options as to what I do to project. First is if you can somehow find an AAV, average auction values. If you're playing in NFBC, they publish average auction values from auctions that take place. Those are really good numbers, especially if you can find something in the same format that you're doing. That's the best. Second is you take an ADP. So go to the NFBC, take one, or go to Yahoo or CBS or anywhere where they publish ADPs. Take the one that most resembles your own format and use a formula. There's 2 ways to do the formula. Number 1 is some mathematical logarithmic formula. I think Jeff Zimmerman a year or 2 ago published that on Fangraphs. But the other one that I like better is a little bit to what you do, Derek. You take last year and you take exactly the distribution. The top player went for 49. The second player went for 48. The third player went for 46. All the way down to the bottom. The 100th player went for 10, and the next player went for 100. And you basically take the order 1 through 200 something, and you take the values in order from 49 all the way down to 1. You match them up, and whatever ADP you have, assign last year's dollar value based on rank for them. And that gives you a nice distribution. It's always wonky at the top. Who knows whether somebody's willing to go to $60 this year or shy of 40. We don't know. But in general, that's a decent way that I found has worked over the years.
Now, I actually have a follow-up. This is a question for both of you. Usually, when we talk about the room, we're actually live in a room. Last year, a lot of these drafts were online instead of live. Does that make a difference? Did you see a difference having a live auction suddenly now online, and vice versa? What's going to happen when an online auction starts going live again? Is there going to be that big of a difference?
I'll jump in first. I think I am so focused on the screen in front of me in a live auction room that it doesn't make as much of a difference for me being online as it probably does for other people. I know Glenn Colton and Rick Wolf, for example, and working in tandem the way you guys do, I think can be really effective if you have a partnership that works out. I think sometimes they have Rick kind of watching the room, watching how people are bidding, watching facial expressions, picking up on different things that are happening at the table that if you're playing on your own and you're not looking up once in a while, you're going to miss some of that, right? So I think if you really like to lean into some of those different cues that you might be able to get playing in person, you would have a little bit of a downgrade having to play online. I mean, I'm sure it's similar to the difference between sitting down and playing poker in a poker room versus playing poker on your computer, right? Similar concepts, at least.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I don't really know the effect of how others play differently, but I definitely find that it's much easier to read. Well, it is much easier to read people when you can see their expressions. I mean, when I play poker, I don't look at my cards first. I'm looking at how somebody else looks their card. When there's a name called out at an auction, I don't need to go to my computer. I know the values pretty well. Obviously, at some point, I'll type it in and just to have the guy in there so I can mark down which team it goes. But I have an idea, and Reuven has his sheets in front of him with the numbers also. I'm more interested in looking at the reaction. I'm staring over there at all the players. Did somebody flinch? Did somebody look like they need it? Did somebody is just, don't need him? And you can get a nice sense of how they're going to go, where they're going to go, how much they need him, whether you can do some price enforcing. We'll talk a little bit about that. Whether you can get them to back off you. You can use also it's about using your voice. I find that I try to hypnotize people by how I say numbers and the inflection point. I'll start out a bit 8. But then I'll inflect if I want them to go higher, if I don't want them to go higher. Doesn't always work.